We will start with House Bill 1235, revised provisions regarding immunizations. Is there any proponent testimony? Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Health and Human Services Committee. Representative Lee Quam from Platte. I come today to present to you HB 1235, which is a medical freedom bill. This bill is about freedom that is protected in our Constitution. It affirms that each citizen has the right to choose or reject any medical procedure free from threat or compulsion and shall not be discriminated against for refusing an unwanted medical intervention. It reinforces and protects freedom for every citizen's own bodily autonomy and that of our precious children. It's unfortunate that this bill is getting the name of the anti-vax bill. It does not ban vaccinations, and I want to be clear that I am not opposed to vaccinations. They have saved millions of lives. For the vaccination portion of this bill provides the freedom to decide if you want to get all the vaccinations as scheduled, some of the vaccinations, or none of the vaccinations, and use a different way to increase the immune system in yourself and your children. Again, this bill affirms the right of each citizen to choose or reject any medical procedure for themselves and their children, free from threat or compulsion, and they shall not be discriminated against for refusing an unwanted intervention. This bill protects freedom for every citizen's own bodily autonomy for themselves and their children. And with that, there's a lot of people out here that want to testify, and I will stand by for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other proponent testimony? Do you want? We will have some Skype testimony today too, so I think. Are we ready for that one? Just in case, just so everybody knows, if we have technical glitches, that will not count for the 40 minutes. We will make sure everybody gets a chance.
Lawrence, could you turn your camera on, please? Lawrence, are you there?
Yes, I'm trying to turn it on.
Okay. Oh, yeah, it's on now.
Okay, go ahead and just start with your testimony.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. My name is Lawrence Pilevsky. I'm a pediatrician licensed to practice pediatric medicine in New York State. I'm here to support Bill 1235. I graduated NYU School of Medicine in 1987 and did a 3-year pediatric residency at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. And over the years, what I have seen and heard is that science has changed. I am supporting the idea that children should not be mandated to have vaccines because science has changed. We are told with certainty that science has been done efficiently on vaccine safety. But yet, if we read the ingredients in the vaccines, we will find that the ingredients have never been tested for injection into human beings, children or adults. And we find that there are safety concerns when looking at these ingredients when injected into animals. Over the years, millions of parents have testified, said to their doctors, my child was fine and got a vaccine. And as a medical student and as a pediatric resident, I was taught to listen to the mother. The mother knows her child. And I will unfortunately say that over the years, these millions of parents who have indicated a concern about a bad reaction to vaccines have been told by the physicians that absolutely nothing happened to their children related to the vaccine, when the parents were the ones who saw it and witnessed it. And when you hear these stories once or twice, or 10 times, they may be coincidences. But when I start to hear the same story repeated from parents all over the country and all over the world, something needs to be done. And so vaccine safety has not been efficiently evaluated, and the ingredients, most of them, are toxic and can enter the brain and lead to concerns that we are seeing in our children today. The real public health crisis in our society today is the concern that children have the highest number of chronic diseases of any country in the world. 1 in 5 children have learning disabilities. 1 in 10 have been diagnosed with ADD and ADHD. 1 in 11 have been diagnosed with asthma. 1 in 12 with significant allergies. 1 in 35 with autism. 1 in 20 under the age of 5 with seizures. Something is happening to the nervous system and the immune systems of our children. And the powers that be continue to insist that vaccine ingredients have nothing to do with these challenges that we're seeing in children. And yet science has changed. The literature does indicate, as much as it might be hard to believe, that there are more and more children who are becoming vulnerable to these vaccine ingredients. And yet these children are sacrificed for the sake of a program that we are told is completely safe and effective. We are told with certainty that vaccines will bring immunity, and yet experts who have testified in Connecticut and in New York and in California have all said that vaccines are maybe only 80% effective. When a child is vaccinated, the child is not guaranteed to develop immunity. And in fact, the literature indicates that 2 to 10% of children will not develop an antibody. That means that the children are not immune. There are also children who will be vaccinated who will develop an antibody. But science shows that even though they develop an antibody, that antibody does not protect them against disease. So maybe 20% or more of children, when vaccinated, are not immune. And that amounts to many more children who are unvaccinated. And so we are also told that if we vaccinate, we will develop community immunity. We will protect the herd. And recent public officials have stated the following, that if we have high enough vaccination percentages, we will be able to protect those who are vulnerable, who are immunocompromised, who are unable to be vaccinated, because the vaccinations will help reduce the amount of bacteria and viruses that can be spread into a community. Now, unfortunately, the scientific community continues to adhere to that statement as if it is 100% true. But the problem is that vaccinations don't make bacteria and viruses disappear from the bodies of those who are vaccinated. So, in fact, vaccinated children may still be able to not only carry the germs that we vaccinate against, but it's possible that the vaccines may alter the bacteria and viruses in those who are vaccinated, even to the point of causing mutations. So when a mother says, I don't want your unvaccinated child playing next to my vaccinated child, she's actually believing that the vaccines in her children have made the bacteria and the viruses disappear from her child's body, and that the only bacteria and viruses to be carried in society are carried by those who are unvaccinated. And unfortunately, that is not true, and that is not scientific. We have never proven that vaccines make the germs disappear in those who have been vaccinated. So if someone wants to vaccinate, they can certainly do it to protect themselves from disease, but it may have nothing to do with protecting other people from getting disease. We are told with certainty that the only way to prevent an outbreak is through vaccination, and yet countless times we are seeing that anywhere between 70, 80, 90, or even 100% of children who get infectious diseases are fully vaccinated. There are many reasons, many ways in which we can prevent outbreaks, and vaccination is just potentially one of them. There are also many reasons for why outbreaks do occur, and outbreaks can occur because vaccines fail. Outbreaks can occur because microorganisms in society can mutate, and outbreaks can occur because microorganisms like bacteria and viruses can be subjected to forces in society that make them activate or turn off without having anything to do with human condition. So in closing, what I'd like to say is that by having unvaccinated children in the population, we are not endangering other children any more than vaccinated children might endanger other children. If you look at the package insert for the varicella or the chickenpox vaccine, children who are given the varicella vaccine are recommended to stay away from children who are immunocompromised because the vaccine itself can cause a spread of illness to those who are most vulnerable. So to think that unvaccinated children are the only reasons an outbreak occurs is not scientific and does not fully address the reasons that outbreaks can occur. Unvaccinated children are often the most healthy children in community. Vaccines do cause harm. We are unfortunately not allowed to even have this discussion or entertain the debate that there is much more injury that is happening in our children than the powers that be are allowing us to talk about. I have heard these stories, and I do recognize how many children have been vaccine injured and continue to be vaccine injured. And I want to say that the science is not settled and that we are not endangering society by allowing children and parents to choose which vaccines they want and whether or not they can get vaccinated at all. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm assuming you can stay on Skype, and if there's questions later, we can direct them to you. So, is there any other proponent testimony? Good morning.
Good morning. My name is James Neuenschwander. That would be the common spelling. I'm a physician in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I'm duly board certified in both emergency and integrative medicine with over 30 years of experience caring for chronically ill adults and children. I've personally witnessed vaccine injuries in my 25-plus years of ER experience, and I've listened to stories of parents who will swear to their dying day that it was a vaccine that caused their child's asthma, seizures, or autism. With the advent of the Gardasil vaccine, I've also listened to athletic, overachieving teenagers tell me that it was the vaccine that caused their chronic headaches, panic attacks, discoordination, weakness, and disability. It was the vaccine that destroyed their lives. I've always been taught to listen to my patients. This led me on a journey to look at the evidence behind vaccine safety and efficacy, and this is what I'm going to discuss today. But first, let me address the idea that we're saving millions of lives with vaccines. Not in the United States. Most of the diseases for which we vaccinate had already reached the point of minimal mortality by the time the vaccine was introduced. Declines in infectious diseases are attributed to better sanitation, better nutrition, and clean water. Out of 4 million cases of measles per year, only about 400 to 500 people died in the 1950s and 60s prior to the measles vaccine. That's a 99.9% decline without any vaccine. The death rates from mumps, rubella, chickenpox, rotavirus, even the flu in children is equally benign. If you add up death rates from all of these illnesses, it's less than 1,000 per year, which means you would have to vaccinate with a vaccine that's 100% effective, causes no mortality, for over 1,000 years to reach that million children saved point. We know the vaccines are not 100% effective, and we know that there are side effects, including death. Peter Aby, a well-known vaccine researcher, reported on a natural randomized trial of the DPT vaccine in Guinea-Bissau that was done in the 1980s. Because of a number of supply issues, about half the children under 3 years of age were randomly vaccinated. When he followed up 30 years later on these children, he discovered that the vaccines were effective at stopping diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus, but those that had been vaccinated were more likely to die of other infectious diseases. Girls in particular were 10 times more likely to die of another infection because they had been vaccinated with the DPT. Vaccines may save lives, but at what cost? This leads to the topic of vaccine safety. This is what most parents are concerned about, and these are the bullet points about which we should all be aware. With the exception of a small number of participants in one Gardasil trial, no vaccine has ever been subjected to a pre-licensure, inert, placebo-controlled trial. This is the gold standard of medicine. Without it, you don't know what the side effects of your product are. Vaccines are compared to other vaccines, vaccines ingredients, or they have no control group at all. Vaccine events are listed in vaccine studies are frequently considered acceptable because they're the same as these non-placebo control groups. The one and only inert placebo-controlled trial done with the Gardasil vaccine had 592 participants. When they were reporting out the benign local reactions, they reported these reactions separately. But then when they were reporting the more serious systemic reactions, including autoimmunity, they combined these 592 saline placebos with thousands of participants that got the aluminum adjuvant as a control. Vaccines are not studied long enough in pre-licensure studies to determine long-term side effects. The MMR, the varicella, were studied for 42 days. The hepatitis B for 4 and 5 days after each injection. The entire section of the package insert devoted to carcinogenesis, mutagenesis, or fertility effects of the vaccine either states the vaccine wasn't tested for this, or that section is just completely eliminated. We don't know if vaccines impair fertility or induce cancer. Most of the vaccines that have been improved with studies that are far too small to find any kind of rare side effect. For example, the current MMR was approved after studying it in 834 participants in 12 studies. This is a vaccine that's given to over 10 million people a year. Hepatitis B trials were very similar. In 1986, Congress removed liability for vaccine injuries from the manufacturers and made the CDC responsible for vaccine safety. They created a passive reporting system called the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VAERS, to identify potential problems. Over 50,000 events are reported to VAERS every year. A Harvard study funded by HHS in 2011 found that less than 1% of all these injuries are ever reported. This would suggest that the rate is closer to 5 million per year. Nothing's ever been done with that information. Congress has repeatedly asked the Institute of Medicine, the IOM, to investigate the ties between vaccines and reported vaccine injuries. The most recent 2012 IOM report on this subject found that for over 86% of these injury pairs, the evidence was inadequate to either accept or reject a causal relationship. The safety science had not been done. In 2013, the IOM published a report on the safety of the entire vaccine schedule and concluded that there was no evidence one way or the other. The studies simply had not been done. If anyone ever claims that there are studies showing the safety of the entire vaccine schedule, please ask them to share those studies with you and with me. Safe and effective is a slogan. It's not a proven fact. There's never been a large study conducted to compare vaccinated to unvaccinated children for health outcomes. As a result of this 2013 study, a group of experts was convened by the CDC to determine if any of the current databases could be used to do a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study of health outcomes. They published a white paper on the subject in 2015 outlining how to do such a study. Nothing's happened. If vaccines were truly great at maintaining public health, we should have the healthiest infants and children in the entire world. We vaccinate more than any other industrialized nation in the world. But when we evaluate those outcomes, unfortunately, the opposite is true. The United States has some of the worst pediatric health outcomes in the industrialized world. Infant mortality and autism rates are at or near the top. Our pediatric rate of chronic disease has risen from about 12% in 1986 to over 50% in 2007. Dr. Mawson's group in Mississippi did a small comparison study revealing that vaccinated kids were 4 times more likely to have autism and 20 times more likely to have allergic rhinitis than their unvaccinated cohorts. We do know that there are children that do not respond to vaccines, 5 to 10%, depending on the vaccine. It makes sense that there are also children that over-respond and are injured by vaccines. Is it appropriate to sacrifice these children in the name of herd immunity? Parents and physicians should have the right to determine what is best for their children and their patients. Mandates are the last-ditch effort by a government to control its population. If vaccines were truly safe and effective, people would be lining up for them. There would be no reason to have mandates. If parents are not willing to accept a product for which there's no long-term safety studies, that were poorly tested for approval, and have no liability, they should have that right. House Bill 1235 would not prevent people from the right to vaccinate, but would enshrine the right of people to be free of vaccine mandates. This would serve as a precedent for other states to follow and provide a landing site for everyone in states that have no exemptions. I ask for its passage.
Okay, thank you. Do we have another on Skype or? Okay. Is there any other proponent testimony? Good morning.
Good morning, Chairman Jensen, committee members. My name is Dr. Neil Roy. I'm a doctor of chiropractic in Sioux Falls. I've been practicing for over 9 years now. I have a wife and 4 kids, and I'm very closely related to these topics. In my undergraduate years and graduate years, I was fortunate to learn from doctors from all over the country, not just my schools, but different parts of the country and different parts of the world. And I was closely associated with a lot of researchers that were doing frontline research in the medical community. So I've seen the benefits of the advancements in organ transplant, cancer treatment, medication use, surgeries, and lifestyle modification. So I believe we have a lot to be thankful for, but what I've also seen is there's no procedure that's perfectly safe. And due to this fact, one of our core constitutional freedoms is the freedom to choose. Choose whether to expose ourselves or our children to inherent risks associated with any medical procedure, and the freedom to object the procedure. You have no guarantees in the practice of healthcare. We also have many treatments and procedures that carry major risk, and with any medical procedure containing risk, the patient's rights must be respected. The patient must be given the right to know risk, reward, and the option to choose. And without choice, there is no freedom. This is concerning when it comes to vaccines in our current direction, because we are mandating a medical procedure in the form of a vaccine which is designed to permanently alter the immune system of the individual. The mandate removes the individual's choice to receive the medical procedure. In the United States, and right here in South Dakota, we have lost our freedom of choice. This bill will give their medical freedom back. I have witnessed this firsthand. My family and I had to switch schools. Our kids were no longer allowed to attend one of the private schools in Sioux Falls because they were not fully vaccinated to meet the needs of the school and the state. Our exemptions were not honored, and our freedom of choice was not granted. Religious exemptions are not being honored in South Dakota. Medical exemptions are nearly impossible to receive because medical doctors will require multiple adverse reactions to different vaccines before granting exemption. So the freedom of choice isn't just narrowing, it's almost extinct. So when an individual's right to make decisions for his or her own body is removed, it opens the door for abuse and oppression. This bill is not about removing vaccines or changing the rate of kids who are immunized. It's about protecting the rights of the people and protecting their ability to choose. So I run a very busy practice with lots of children. I see children that are fully vaccinated, unvaccinated, undelayed, or on partial schedules. And hands down, the healthiest kids I see in practice are unvaccinated or on delayed schedules. Yet parents are losing their right to choose that option. You will hear it's for the good of the child, and this is not true. You will hear sad statistics about how deadly these infections are to children, and these statistics come from third world countries where malnutrition and starvation are very prevalent, countries that lack sanitation and proper hygiene. These are countries where medical care is scarce, and something as simple as diarrhea can be deadly. This is a different cohort of people, and it's not comparable to the living conditions of South Dakota. So, for example, it's well documented that measles is easily treated with vitamin A. So if you just improve the vitamin deficiency, you can change the outcome of the disease. Most of these diseases are usually very mild, and worst case scenario, a round of antibiotics would treat the disease. When talking statistics, it's important that we're comparing the proper cohorts. In my professional experience, unvaccinated children are far healthier with less autoimmune diseases or allergies. Unvaccinated children are wildly healthy, and this is not just in my clinic. I have colleagues all across the country that see the same results within their patient populations. It becomes common knowledge amongst most holistic doctors that the healthier kids have less vaccines. So you will hear it's for herd immunity or community immunity, but the science does not back that up. And even if the science did support the fallacy of herd immunity, it is unconstitutional to force people to undergo medical procedures against their will. And there are three major flaws in herd immunity. First, herd immunity experts claim you need anywhere from 80 to 95% vaccine rate to be effective. So it depends on the germ as far as the percentage. But this has never happened. And the reason it's never happened is because even if childhood rates are near 90% or more, the adult rates are extremely low. So for required vaccines, at best you're going to have a 60% vaccine rate in adults, but most are around 40% or below. So what happens is you're never going to reach that rate of herd immunity. We've never gotten there. And either way, the vaccines will diminish over time, which means when they test the blood titers, the vaccine's effectiveness decreases with time. And so with every vaccine diminishing, this means adults who haven't received the childhood vaccine boosters are actually spreading the diseases. So adult vaccine rates would have to be near 90%, not just school-aged children. Yet we're not seeing epidemics. So the biggest risk to a child would not actually be children, but it would be adults. Secondly, vaccines would need to provide lifetime protection. The reason people get boosters is because even if you get the desired effect, it will wear off. Yet nobody really knows definitively or unequivocally when they do. This decreases a population's percentage of vaccinated. Most vaccines that school-age kids are required to have actually have a 4 to 9 year window of effectiveness, if they're effective at all. So for example, in South Dakota, a child is required 4 rounds of diphtheria vaccine to attend school. And most children who follow this plan will receive their 4th dose between 15 and 18 months. So this vaccine only lasts 10 years at best. So what about the kids that are in junior high and high school? They would then, according to the science, have almost no protection from the infection. So herd immunity is not possible in this situation. The pertussis vaccine only lasts 4 to 6 years. In South Dakota, the current schedule, most kids would get their 4th dose by 18 months. So once children have started school, they're already nearing the end of the effectiveness for the vaccine, or it's completely ineffective already. So based on the science, this would mean nearly all kids in 1st or 2nd grade are at risk for the infection. Yet we have minimal outbreaks. And remember, the adults are not up to date on their vaccines either. So effectiveness and longevity have made herd immunity impossible up to this point. So you will hear we need to protect herd immunity, but we cannot protect the loss of something we never had in the first place. And thirdly, history does not support herd immunity. The CDC says that the vaccine rates for children in the United States in 1985 were significantly lower than today. And 9 of the vaccines we routinely give did not exist in 1985. Vaccine rates in 1985 for DTP was 63%, polio was 53%, and MMR was 61%. The vaccine rates for these 3 vaccines we did give were dramatically below herd immunity, yet we didn't see epidemics. We have never been close to herd immunity. Herd immunity is a marketing campaign and has nothing to do with actual science. So this is a personal rights issue, not a health issue. You do not need to try to protect herd immunity. When these laws were put into place requiring children to be vaccinated to go to school, only a couple of vaccines were required with 1 dose each. The number of vaccines given today has jumped dramatically, and there's nothing to protect the people from it jumping more. So what that means to you is this: the medical community could at any point force each one of you in your seats to become up to date on all of your childhood vaccines, and they would have the right to add as many as they want, if you don't have the right to say no. And so it's not about should people get vaccinated or not. It's not about mandating treatment. And so I would hope that South Dakota would vote to protect the people by supporting this bill. So Chairman Jensen, committee members, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have another on Skype that's ready? Or okay. Yeah, so we'll go to Skype testimony, proponent testimony. Okay, we can't hear you yet. Hang on 1 second.
Okay, go ahead, Kevin, whenever you're ready. Just a second. You might be muted, Kevin.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kevin Barry. I'm an attorney from New York, and I welcome the opportunity to speak with you this morning. I'm a former U.S. attorney in the Southern District, New York. I worked there as an AUSA. I am a United Nations representative. I am the author of a book called Vaccine Whistleblower about fraud conducted by the CDC on vaccine safety studies. And I advocate around the country on this issue. And I want to say it's just a wonderful breath of fresh air to see this bill after fighting against all the nanny state bills around the country, where the state is trying to impose its decision-making instead of parents in the ordinary course of business of vaccination. And one of the things that I think is fantastic about this bill is its simplicity, and it also does a wonderful job of finally honoring what the international human rights and bioethics standards are. So let me share that with you. This is from 2005. It's from the International Bioethics and Human Rights Standard. Article 6, consent. Any preventative, vaccines are preventative, any preventative, diagnostic, and therapeutic medical intervention is only to be carried out with the prior, free, and informed consent of the person concerned, based on adequate information. The consent should, where appropriate, be express and may be withdrawn by the person concerned at any time and for any reason without disadvantage or prejudice. So I read some of the opposition to this bill, and that is clear as day, that the international standard is about individual liberty, where the individual can withdraw it at any time for any reason, right? It doesn't have to be religion. It could be philosophical. That's the international standard, without disadvantage or prejudice. Being kept out of public school, being coerced into homeschooling, that's certainly a prejudice. If someone wants to homeschool, fantastic. But being forced to do so is not the duty of the state. It's a bad situation. So, and furthermore, the Article 3 of the same declaration, again, this is not ancient history. This is 2005, unanimously adopted by 193 countries, including the United States. So under the section Human Dignity and Human Rights, the interests and welfare of the individual should have priority over the sole interest of science or society. So this to me, this fits into the American tradition of liberty. It is the international standard, and those standards didn't develop out of nowhere. Those standards came from out of World War II and out of atrocities, out of the bad result when the state makes decisions for the individual. It's usually a better scenario when the individual makes the decision for themselves, and that is also quintessentially American. And another thing I want to say about this bill, and it perhaps even needs to be spelled out directly, because it's implied, but that every single person who wants to get a vaccine can get one. Nothing changes in the access to vaccines. It's just saying that it's not required to enroll in school or daycare. So there's no impediment to anyone who wants to get any vaccine to get them. And the concept is individual families, individual parents make your decisions, and everybody meets at school. And that should be the standard. Because as the doctor said, I won't get into it deeply, but the actual danger to the immunocompromised person is the recently vaccinated person with a live virus. That person is shedding virus and could be a danger to an immunocompromised person in school. But this bill's not saying that people with live virus should be excluded from school. And all of the other protections that you have, that all states have, about in the event of an outbreak, people can be quarantined or stay home, those are all still here. They're all still here. There's nothing, and I guess a bottom line thing I would love for the people voting on this to take away is this is being billed as a radical proposal or an unusual proposal, and it's not. It's this you are doing what the international bioethics standards are. So this is not radical. You should feel very comfortably on solid ground with this proposal. And I also want to say that because we'll hear from the other side soon, is you don't always get the right information from the medical establishment. For example, in Idaho, 2 years ago, there was a headline that there was a hot spot where there was 25%, it was a national headline, where 25% of the county of kindergartners had religious exemptions and were not fully vaccinated. So that was a hot spot. That was 2 out of 7 students, 2 out of 7 kindergartners in a county of over 1,000 square miles. So please scratch the surface of the talking points of the other side, because I saw they also mentioned that the World Health Organization mentioned vaccine hesitancy is a top 10 concern for the World Health Organization, but they leave out that medical error is the 3rd leading cause of death in the United States after heart disease and cancer. So you're not always getting the full story from the other side, and all you need to do to realize that is scratch the surface. And I would also urge, and so I'm strongly urge you to support this bill. I also strongly urge you to support it with a veto-proof margin, because there's going to be a lot of pressure put on your governor to not let this happen, to not let this kind of bill start taking off in the United States, because it seems like it should be impossible in 2020 that there are religious freedom refugees in the United States, but there are. There are tens of thousands of families who left California when they passed their bill. California, during this census, stands to lose a congressional seat for the first time ever. New York passed a bill that created religious freedom refugees. 76,000 people left New York, and New York is commissioning a panel to try to figure out why people left. And creating religious freedom refugees is bad public policy. I think this bill is a start towards good public policy, towards recognizing that this is a very complicated issue, and it's not only public health, it's religious liberty, it's access to public schools, 2 fundamental rights, and public health. And the public health standards around the country are usually you can have your religious liberty unless you're disturbing the peace and safety of the state. And the people who vaccinate differently are not disturbing the peace and safety of any state. They're not. And the doctors went into that, so I won't go over. And thank you so much for letting me come. And I heard the question to Dr. Plevsky earlier. I'm happy to stay around and answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other proponent testimony? We are down to about 6 or 7 minutes. Yes. Push the red button on the microphone. Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I'm going to modify my comments a little bit here in the interest of time. My name is Tony Creel, and I'm here today on behalf of the National Vaccine Information Center in support of this medical freedom bill. As a graduate of Riggs High School and the University of South Dakota, it's a great pleasure that I am here today in this beautiful state and Capitol building where I once worked. I'm so proud of my home state for initiating a medical freedom bill that reaffirms our constitutional right to make medical decisions for our families and ourselves. While states all over the country are passing bills to take away these rights, South Dakota is doing the right thing. So those who object to a medical freedom provided for in this bill do so on grounds that it proposes to eliminate currently required school immunizations, but in fact it does not do that. This medical freedom bill eliminates the coercive mandates for medical procedures, and it restores informed consent rights and medical freedom to our system of health care. It recognizes and honors not the state, but the doctor-patient relationship is the vehicle for determining the optimal solution for the individual's health. The objection to medical freedom here concerns not how will we survive without vaccine mandates, but how medical freedom will impact the power of the government and our healthcare industry to enforce compliance of whatever medicine or medical procedure they think we need. Historically, the pretext for vaccination mandates goes back to 1905 in Jacobson's versus Massachusetts, where the requirement for a smallpox vaccine constituted a very narrow circumstance and put strict limitations on police power. The court warned back then that the exercise of police power may not violate or impinge on the rights secured by our Constitution. When in 1962 mass vaccination was initiated as a federal public health policy, the government saw to it that exemption provisions were included in the law in order to make the coercive law just. So health law has a strong history of recognizing bodily integrity as a constitutionally protected liberty wherein adults can choose to accept or refuse a proposed medical procedure. In public health law relating to communicable disease, state power to constrain individual rights required a very specific standard. A person must have a present disease and the person's actions must pose a direct threat to others. Healthy people were not viewed as a threat to the public. So how did we get to the point today where we are witnessing thousands of citizens showing up at state capitol buildings all over the country, imploring and begging their legislators to protect existing rights and protections that are written into vaccine laws, only to walk away in shock and disbelief as their legislators sign away those rights in the name of coercive public health policy goals that expand the scope of police power? In fact, federal health policy has, for the past 50 years, been laying the groundwork to eliminate all barriers to implementing in every state mandatory tracking and surveillance on every citizen and compulsory vaccination for every child and adult in this country. And this is what we're seeing. This is an agenda of forced compliance with no hesitancy, no exceptional circumstances, no exemptions, no informed consent, and where healthcare providers become agents of the states. This policy of forced compliance does not stop with vaccines or children. The people and organizations that object to this bill are asking you to let them keep this police power of enforcement. And of course, meanwhile, we have a growing epidemic of vaccine injury and deaths with billions in compensation paid out by citizens, and where manufacturers and doctors are liability free. We never get to talk about the dark side of this dangerous practice and this policy of forced compliance. Our media, our government health officials, doctors, and the stakeholders who profit from this business get to conveniently omit these pertinent facts when telling us that everyone must be vaccinated. Those who question the legitimacy of the practice and the policy are censored, ridiculed, and discriminated against. The prevailing attitude about vaccine injury and death seems to be that a little bit of collateral damage, a little bit of coercion is acceptable because public health policies must be met. But this is the kind of thinking that the vaccine paradigm begets. The fact is, the plans that our public health system have for us with enforced compliance at best amounts to medical tyranny, but at the end of the day, it's the road to hell. Those who would sacrifice our rights for this kind of medical tyranny is serving the special interests of a corrupt industry and not the rights of its citizens. Finally, a legislator's first job is to protect our rights.
Excuse me, I'm going to have to interrupt. I hate to do this. You're representing a group, but you're not on the registered lobbyist list. You do need to be as registered as a lobbyist to present as a group. If you want to continue representing yourself, you can, but we're down to a few minutes.
Okay, I just have one final statement for myself.
Sorry, I hate to do that, but that's one of the rules here.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I apologize, but we do have to stick to committee rules. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Stacia Buckles, and I'm from District 16, Elk Point. I was a new mother in 2005, and I was going to do everything right. Just as the doctor told me, I trusted my doctor. She was amazing. I was ready and comfortable to hand over all the decisions about my child. The day my son was born, we didn't do the recommended vaccine, which was the hepatitis B shot, just the vitamin K shot. At 2 months, he received 6 different vaccines in 2 shots. He screamed. He screamed for almost 24 hours straight, and he ran a fever during this time as well. The screaming was high-pitched, and he was inconsolable. I didn't know that this was listed as a vaccine reaction. He started spitting up regularly after eating, and I would burp him over the sink because it was expected that he would throw up after feeding. And not just spit up, but a violent throwing up, projectile vomiting. I didn't know that this was listed as a vaccine reaction. But the screaming tapered off, and I was told the spitting up was normal. At 4 months, my son received another 6 vaccines. The fever and the screaming began again. The screaming continued for over a week this time. I would bounce on an exercise ball very strongly, and if I slowed down or stopped, the screaming would persist. I bounced for hours. I thought I was going to pop that ball. I still didn't know that this was listed as a reaction to vaccines. His vomiting got worse. Sometimes he would vomit while he was being fed. He started developing dry spots on his skin, and I didn't know that this was listed as a reaction to vaccines. The spots started to spread, and I was told it was probably the lotion that I was using. At this point, my son began to have episodes that we coined tremors. He would fall asleep, and his whole body would go limp, and he would start to shake, and I could not wake him up. And this is how I described it to my doctor, and it's written in his records as shakes. At 6 months, my son received another 6 vaccines, and we repeated the entire cycle again, screaming, fever, bouncing for hours, skin irritations that wouldn't go away, vomiting, and more vomiting. I believed that all of this was normal, but the tremors got worse, and I knew that this wasn't normal. My mom got to witness one, and she was very alarmed. She mentioned the tremors to her sister, who's a doctor in Washington State. This is where my education began. My aunt told me to look into vaccines, and she sent me a few books to read, and I began to dig. At 9 months, my son had a well-child visit. No vaccine scheduled for this one, but written on his charts is drifts off to sleep and shakes. This is written right above a box that is checked saying no reaction to immunizations. The vomiting continued with regularity, and the tremors continued. At 12 months, my son was slated to receive another 9 vaccines. The MMR was to be added. Here on his records, I begin to find my voice. Mother wishes to hold off vaccinations. The shakes are recorded again. The doctor started to question my son's iron levels, telling me that anemia may be causing his shakes. In his records, I see Fe, which is iron, versus shots, ? And it should be noted that there were no other symptoms. He didn't display fatigue, shortness of breath, rapid heartbeat, pale skin, nothing. They drew his blood. I didn't understand how to read these results at the time, so I had to rely on what they were telling me. And I was told he was severely anemic. He needed to start iron supplements immediately, and if he got any worse, we would be talking transfusions. This decoy successfully took my eye off of immunizations. Last year, I dug out my son's medical records, and I stumbled across his lab results that were taken that day 14 years ago. Results from the lab draw that was suspiciously never repeated to check his alarming levels. His hemoglobin and his red blood cell count were normal. No alarm was necessary, no supplements were necessary, and a blood transfusion was definitely not necessary. There are many things, I did cross-reference those results with a doctor as well. There are many things on his 12-month records that I'm still trying to understand. You doctors need to write nicer. I know that ? Shakes is written on the section where it says immunization reactions, but nothing was ever done to pursue that avenue. A box was also checked saying that I needed vaccine counseling because I refused them at this visit. Let me tell you what else I know. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. About a month after this visit, my son experienced his last seizure. I've stopped calling them by pet names, and I've started using the term that should have been used 14 years ago. He's never had another one. Thank God I educated myself, and thank God I had someone who gently threw a red flag to get me to start questioning the status quo. The guilt surrounds me when I think of my ignorance, of my blindness, but I'm not blind anymore. I'm not going to guess the motivations of my doctor at the time. The sky is the limit. But I'll say that none of the possible excuses are very flattering. One of the arguments against this bill is that if you can't get vaccines, then get a medical exemption. My son was denied that opportunity. From my understanding, in order to get a medical exemption for him, I would have to submit him to vaccines, and I will not do that. Why would I take that chance? It should be noted that we did vaccinate our second son with the first round of 6 immunizations. He had 2 episodes of seizures. We wanted to do things right still. We wanted to follow the rules, and we were told that reactions were rare. His doctor at the time did not record his reactions because she didn't see them herself. Even after I told her that his brother had the same thing. My husband and I have turned away from vaccines, and we have never looked back. I've had 2 doctors overlook very serious reactions. My trust in a doctor's judgment is severely damaged. This bill is meant to support a parent's right to choose what is best for their child and a person's right to choose what is best for their body. An exemption is just a permission slip. I shouldn't need to use my religion as an excuse to refuse any treatment, and I most definitely shouldn't have to hope for the benevolence of a doctor to bless me with a medical exemption for myself or my children. This is my right as an American, as a mother, and as a human. Please vote to support HB 1235. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll have time to take one more, and please, and I know this is a very emotional issue. If you could be brief, please.
Yeah, I'll be brief.
For the opposition, I will allow us the same amount of time, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, committee members. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here today. I hold probably the most powerful title here, and that is of a mother. I am a vaccinated mother of 3 fully vaccinated children. This is my beautiful daughter, Evie.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you tell us your name and where you're from?
Katie Clovis. I'm from Minnesota, and I have a lot of family in South Dakota. I'm sorry, you said to be brief. So this is my beautiful daughter, Evie. I went in for Evie's 6-month appointment on February 27th of last year, 2019. She was perfectly healthy, hitting all of her milestones. We had a nurse who couldn't list off the vaccination she was about to receive, but I didn't think anything of it. I had no idea that those 2 shots that she received held a total of 6 vaccines. I was never given a vaccine information safety pamphlet, and I was never told about any risks that may occur. So it's safe to say that I never gave true informed consent. Evie developed a sandpaper-like rash on her cheeks about 4 hours after her shots. The next day, she was shaking her head back and forth all day long. I thought she was teething, and I thought she had developed the ability to tell me no all of a sudden at 6.5 months. That wasn't it. And she wouldn't eat solid foods. She fell asleep on my breast that night and was in a deep slumber. She didn't stir when I laid her down to bed. The next morning, March 1st, 2019, just 36 hours after Evie received those 6-month vaccinations, my daughter didn't wake up to my singing when I came back in the room from going to the bathroom. She didn't wake up to my screaming her name. She didn't wake up when I picked her up and held her to my chest, screaming for God to not do this to me. This is what Evie looked like the last time I saw her. The sandpaper-like rash still on her cheeks. Her head shaking was because her brain was swelling. It was the size of an 11-month-old, and deadly immune cells were infiltrating a part of her brain, attacking it. Lethal amounts of bacteria were found in her heart blood. Her spleen was 4 times its size, a sign of her immune system trying hard to fight something off. We don't really know what's in these vaccinations. None of us do. Parents are being harassed and forced into getting their child caught up on their shots. We are not receiving informed consent. These vaccinations are not a one-size-fits-all, and it is a sick and disturbing thought to think every medication has risks. Sometimes people will get hurt and they will die, but it's for the greater good. Because my daughter was not an acceptable sacrifice. If that nurse had told me what so many neuropathologists and doctors have told me since Evie died, that SIDS is a syndrome, not a disease, not a cause of death, in invulnerable infants, vaccinations can and do induce a SIDS episode, Evie would still be alive today. A lot of eyes are on South Dakota right now. House Bill 1235 is something to be admired. And millions of devastated families and more, like mine, are fighting hard for their medical freedom and the protection of their parental rights. And believe it or not, we are now the majority. Please be one of the few states right now that does the right thing for their people and vote yes on House Bill 1235.
Thank you. Thank you.